This week, we're going to break down how to choose what investment account type is right for me with our investments expert and VP of Financial Education at Squire, Casey Halliley. We already talked about this. It's probably not going to be under 5 minutes, but we're going to attempt as always. So let's get moving. We're talking about what investment account is right for us. Usually when people go to open an investment account, one of the first questions they ask is what kind of account you need. It can be very confusing. So I figured, Casey, you can try to clear that up for us.
I'm going to try. And I agree. I think that this is a really crummy way to start an investment relationship because I've heard this over and over again, that most people go to a financial institution already feeling a little bit overwhelmed. And then they look at a list of about a dozen account types and they get really, really confused. And account types are a pretty important decision because it can have all sorts of important tax implications, or can allow you access to your money or not allow you to have access to your money. So we're going to try to simplify this process for you guys as much as possible today. So let's try to simplify the process as much as possible. I'm going to assume you're just a person trying to save. And the problem is that not all of the accounts that they list will be applicable to people that are just trying to save either for tomorrow or for their long-term retirement. But if you go to open up an account at most financial institutions, here are some of the names that you will hear or see: traditional IRA, Roth IRA, rollover IRA, joint account, individual account, SEP IRA, simple IRA, solo 401k, UGMA, UTMA. There are a ton of accounts that they list.
Wow, that's a lot. Should we go through them one by one? Do you want to do that?
Yeah, sure. Well, luckily we can bucket a few of them up. So the first four accounts that I listed are probably the most common accounts you'll be looking at if you're a person trying to save for yourself or for your retirement. So those four are traditional IRA, Roth IRA, and joint and individual account.
What are the differences between those?
So IRA accounts are for retirement. IRA stands for individual retirement account. And those accounts allow you to put money away for yourself in a tax-advantaged way. So with a traditional IRA, you're going to put in pre-tax money, so money that you have not paid income tax on yet. And a Roth IRA is post-tax money, so money you have already paid income tax on. And both of these accounts will allow your money to grow tax-free, which means that if you invest money and it doubles over 10 years or triples over 20 years, you won't owe any tax on the gains that you've made on the investments inside those accounts. So with a traditional IRA, you put before tax money in, and then when you take the money out in retirement, you pay income tax on it at whatever your current income tax rate is at that time, in the year that you take it out. IRAs work just like 401ks, and Roth IRAs are kind of like the opposite. You put after-tax money into it. It grows tax-free all of that time, but then you never have to pay income tax on that money again when you take it out. So with a traditional IRA, you're kicking the can down the road, hoping to pay taxes on the money at a later date, hopefully when you're in perhaps a lower tax bracket. And with the Roth, you're paying up front, which eliminates your exposure to the risk of what tax rates can do in the future.
What about the joint and individual accounts?
Joint and individual accounts are fully taxable. So you put after-tax money into them, like money from your paycheck, and you will owe taxes on any gains or dividends you earn in those accounts each year.
Are those the only differences between them?
No, with the exception of some provisions, the money in a traditional IRA is not accessible to you until you turn 59 and a half. And the money in a Roth is also sort of locked up. So with a Roth, you can access your contributions, but not your earnings. So the account, the money in a retirement account, you should think of as money that is locked up for you so that you can't really access it. And then the other difference is that both of those accounts are protected in bankruptcy for you. So if you go bankrupt, that money is protected. Nobody can touch it.
All right. So I'm assuming the money in a joint individual account is fully accessible, and that's not protected in bankruptcy?
Correct.
You mentioned one of the first accounts was rollover accounts, rollover IRA, whatever. Can you explain those?
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up, actually. So you can roll over like money with like money. So if you have a few after-tax accounts, like a Roth 401k and a couple of Roth IRAs, maybe that you collected over the years, you started at different institutions, you can roll all of those together. You can roll them all into a Roth IRA. or you can roll them all into a Roth 401k. You can also roll a bunch of old 401ks, regular ones, into a traditional IRA and/or a bunch of regular IRAs into one regular 401k. So these accounts are completely fungible with each other. So as long as you keep like money with like money, you can roll them into each other. So when you see the rollover IRA option, when you go to open up an investment account, that means that you could open that up and roll an old 401k or a few of your old 401ks into that account.
Are there any restrictions to what we can invest in those accounts?
Not really. You can pretty much invest in whatever you want in most of these accounts. I always say that you should check with an accountant or your financial advisor if you have any questions, but for the most part, when it comes to traditional investments like stocks and bonds and funds and mutual funds and index funds, etc., you can pretty much invest in whatever you want in most of these accounts.
One of the ways that I always had a success in understanding this is IRA is really just the rules of the IRS to what happens with the money, when does it get taxed, how can you use it, and then the investment inside of it are the actual investments where you're making the money. So that always helped me to understand what that means, because when you say how can we invest, most people will be like, well, I'm investing in an IRA. I'm like, well, yes, what inside of an IRA? So let's look at the next group of accounts, the SEP IRA, simple IRA, solo 401k. Those sound a little bit more complicated, or they're mostly business accounts?
Exactly. So these accounts are not really applicable for people who are just trying to save and invest. They are retirement accounts one would use if you had your own small business. So I think we should save those for another podcast. I don't want to clutter the information for people that are looking to just start saving and investing.
And then you did mention UGMA and UTMA. Sounds interesting.
Yes, and I would say the exact same thing. So those two stand for Uniform Gifts to Minors Act and Uniform Transfers to Minors Act.
So those are mostly for kids rather than just us individually.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Anything else in these accounts?
To wrap up, I would just say that it's always a good idea to speak to your accountant before opening up any type of account. If they know your financial situation, they can help advise you on the type of account that's right for you. You have to be pretty careful with income eligibility requirements with the IRAs, but if you're eligible for them, in some cases, they can be much better off. You could be much better off investing in them than the taxable accounts. But of course, that always depends on your individual financial situation.
Right. So talk to the professionals, get educated, learn all this stuff, and then take action.
And then get started.
Yeah, get started. That's the biggest thing, or just do it. Well, this is all great. Thank you, Casey, as always. Really appreciate it. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the More Than Money podcast. If you feel like you learned something or enjoyed this episode today, we ask you to do a few things. Number one, leave us a 5-star rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to. If there's something you're struggling with and want us to cover, let us know in your review and we'll make sure to cover it soon. Second, make sure to follow Squire on social media and share this podcast with any workers, employees, or friends. This podcast is made possible by Squire, customized financial wellness program that will help you create a culture of care with happier and healthier employees day in and out. Whether you're a business owner, HR manager, or just someone trying to live your best life, Squire is for you. Head over to squire.com to learn more about how Squire can transform your workforce. And that's squire.com.